So first of all, you want everything to be in standard form. Standard form is when everything is on one side and it's in the form that you see right here, ax squared plus bx plus c. A is the number that's with your x squared. B is the number that's with x. C is your constant. It's the number by itself. So first let's talk about the discriminant. The discriminant is represented by b squared minus 4ac. So before we even get to quadratic formula, b squared minus 4ac is the part that is underneath the radical. So real quick, I'm going to jump ahead just a little bit. Quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. This is the quadratic formula. So if you notice here, the discriminant is this part right here. It's the part underneath the radical. And it tells us a few things about what the quadratic formula is going to do. So it's just a small part of the quadratic formula. So we're going to focus on it first. So just doing the b squared minus 4ac, plugging into that formula, if the discriminant is positive, what that means is you will have two real solutions. If it's negative, if you get a negative number, it means you will have two imaginary solutions. And if it's 0, it means you will have one real solution. Now remember last unit we talked about imaginary numbers and having I, and that's where that will come into play. So let's go ahead and use the discriminant formula and find the discriminant and describe the type of roots. So for our first one here, it is in standard form because everything is together on one side. So the number with x squared, this is your A. The number with x is B. The number by itself is C. And so all you do is plug that in to b squared minus 4ac. Remember to use parentheses. So we got negative 3 squared minus 4 times a, which is 2, times c, which is negative 10. And you plug that in. So like I said, use parentheses when you are squaring a negative number. If you don't use parentheses, it will not give you the right thing. And you can just type that in your calculator, and you should get 89. So 89 is the discriminant. Since it's positive, that means we would have two real solutions. So for B, this number is going to be A because that's with x squared. That's technically a negative 1. This number is going to be B, your 3, and negative 3 is going to be C. All right, so when we plug that in, we've got 3 squared minus 4. 4 is just part of the formula. This 4 is always going to be there. Times A, which is negative 1, times C, which is negative 3. So you can type that in, and you should get negative 3. So negative 3 is your discriminant. So reading your rules up above, when the discriminant is negative, that means you will have two imaginary solutions. All right, and our last one, make sure it's in standard form. Everything's on one side. So here's our A, here's our B, here's our C, and we'll plug it into our formula. So we have negative 4 squared minus 4 times A, which is 4, times C, which is 1. So remember that first 4, this 4 right here will always be there. That's never going to change. All right, so this time you should get 0. 0 is our discriminant, and when you get 0, that means we will have one real solution. Okay, so that's using the discriminant. Now, another type of problem that we will have is you will be given the roots and you will have to write a quadratic function. So this is kind of working backwards from like factoring. So this is kind of like what we just learned how to do, what we just did. So what you're going to start doing is you're going to do the opposite. You're going to put these in parentheses and you're going to take the opposite. So if it's a -3, you're going to do x plus 3. If it's a +5, you're going to do x minus 5. And you just set it equal to y. And then from there, all you do is multiply it out. Like, that's it. So we do FOIL. X times x is x squared. X times -5 is -5x. 3 times x is 3x. 3 times -5 is -15. Combine our like terms. We get x squared minus 2x minus 15 equals y. And this is our quadratic function. Now, on this one, still put it in parentheses. Remember, do the opposite. So if it's a +1/3, you're going to put x minus 1/3. That's the only thing you really got to remember is you just do the opposite sign. And we're going to do x plus 2/5 and set equal to y. Okay, so remember before when we had fractions and we did like our slide divide bottoms up, you just got to remember to do that now. We're just going to do bottoms up for these. When you have fractions, just do bottoms up. And we've got 3x minus 1, 5x plus 2 equals y. And now FOIL. 3x times 5x is 15x squared. 3x times 2 is 6x. -1 times 5x is -5x. -1 times 2 is -2. Combine our like terms, and we'll get 15x squared plus x minus 2 equals y. All right, last one, like this. We'll do x minus 5/4, because remember we're doing opposite signs, and we do x plus 7 equals y. Since we have a fraction, you do bottoms up, 4x minus 5, and just rewrite x plus 7. And now we FOIL. 4x times x is 4x squared. 4x times 7 is 28x. -5 times x is -5x. And -5 times 7 is -35. We'll combine our like terms, and we'll get 4x squared plus 23x minus 35 equals y. So that's how, if you're given the roots, to write a quadratic function. Now we get into using the quadratic formula. Now, there is a song you can sing to help you remember quadratic formula. You do need to memorize this. So I will sing it for you real quick. So it goes like this. X equals -b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So that's how the song goes. So you can replay that if you like. Hope you had fun listening. Okay. So you want to make sure it's in standard form. Make sure everything is on one side. So on example A, everything is on one side. And you're just plugging into a formula, simplifying and solving. So it is. So here is your A. Here's your B. Here's your C. And we're just going to plug in, simplify, and solve. So we do x equals negative, because negative is part of your formula. So that's where the negative comes from. Then we plug in our b. Well, b is -10. I like to put in parentheses because I already have a negative there. Then it's plus or minus the square root of b squared. So -10 squared minus 4, because the 4 is part of the formula. A is 1. C is 24, and it's all over 2. 2 is part of the formula, and then 8 is 1. Notice I did not plug in any of the x's. All I plugged in were numbers. None of the x's went into this formula. I plugged in straight numbers. Do not plug in x's into quadratic formula. You are just taking the numbers in front of your x's. If you plug in x's, you're going to get messed up. You're not going to be able to do it. You're going to get really, really confused. You should only ever plug in numbers. And now we're going to simplify this. So let's start simplifying. So first of all, when we look here, you see the double negative right here. Well, that double negative is going to turn into a positive. Okay, so we're going to get a positive 10 plus or minus. Now, I'm going to leave this as a square root. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do this part right here. I'm going to figure out this part, in my calculator. Okay? Make sure you put that negative 10 in parentheses, because if you don't, you will get something different. Okay? So negative 10 squared minus 4 times 1 times 24 is going to give you 4. Whoops, forgot to switch my pen here. So we get 4. And then 2 times 1 is 2. All right, so I like to go step by step. Now I'm going to break it down again. Square root of 4, that's going to turn into 2. Now, what this plus or minus means is I'm going to do 2 things here. 10 plus 2, you're going to do 10 minus 2. So 10 plus 2 is going to be 12. And I got 12 divided by 2. And then 10 minus 2 is going to be 8. And I've got 8 divided by 2. And then, of course, I'm going to reduce those fractions. 12 divided by 2 is 6. And 8 divided by 2 is 4. So those are my 2 answers using quadratic formula. Okay, moving on to B. Okay, so remember, I mentioned before, it's got to be in standard form. B is our first problem that's not in standard form, meaning everything is not on one side. So my first step on B is to move the negative 1. I need to move it over here. So I have 4x squared plus 4x plus 1, because it changed sides, therefore it changes signs, equals 0. Okay, so now I have A, B, C. A is with x squared, B is with x, C is the number by itself. So now my first step is to plug into quadratic formula. So let me just draw this line here. Keep everything separated. So x equals negative B. Whoops, I'm not sure what happened there. Okay, so negative B, and since B is positive, I don't have to put it in parentheses, plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4 times A times C, all over 2 times A. All right, so now I'm going to simplify. I've got negative 4 plus or minus the square root. So remember what I mentioned earlier. I'm just calculating this part. I'm not typing in the radical. I'm just going to type in my calculator 4 squared minus 4 times 1. I'm not typing in the square root. I'm only typing in 4 squared minus 4 times 1. Okay, which is going to be 0. Okay, and then the square root of 0 is 0, so I have negative 4 over 8, because plus or minus 0 is, not going to be anything. I just get negative 4 over 8, and negative 4 over 8 is going to be negative 1/2. So on this one, I only have one answer. Okay, so on C, I need to move this to the other side. Now, this needs to go in the middle here because that's your x. X goes in the middle. So when I write this in standard form, I have 5x squared plus 7x. It was negative on the right, so on the left it's going to be positive, plus 3 equals 0. So here's my A, here's my B, here's my C. So when I plug it in, I've got x equals negative 7 plus or minus the square root of 7 squared minus 4 times A, which is 5, times C, which is 3, all over 2 times A, which is 5. Okay, so when I simplify, I've got negative 7 plus or minus the square root. If I simplify this part right here, then that's going to give me, so all I'm typing in is 7 squared minus 4 times 5 times 3. I get negative 11. And then 2 times 5 is 10. Okay, so let's talk about how to simplify this one. So what we want to do is we've got to simplify our radical right here. So we go through our process of breaking down the radical. Well, are there any perfect squares that go into 11? No, but we can't leave that negative on the inside. So remember, what do we turn that negative into? Well, we turn it into an I. So all we can do is pull out that negative. It's going to turn into an I. The 11 stays, and we're going to leave it just like that. This whole thing here is our answer. Leave it just like that. We can't break it down any more than that. So this one, since the square root's not a perfect square, that's it. Okay, on D, we got to get it in standard form. 8x, since it's an x, remember it goes to the middle. Oh, I did it again. Okay, so 8's going to go to the middle. So it's going to be minus 8. So minus 8x, let me slide this up, plus 11 equals 0. All right, so if I plug in, so here's A, B, C. Remember, A is 1. So x equals negative, since B is negative 8, that's when I like to use parentheses, plus or minus the square root, B squared, since it's negative, put it in parentheses, minus 4 times A, which is 1, times C, which is 11, all over 2 times A. Okay, if we simplify, the double negatives means 8's going to be positive. If I do what's inside the radical, I'm going to get 20. Okay, so I've got to simplify. What I'm going to do is I'm going to simplify the square root of 20. Okay, so I'm going to go over here to the side, and I'm going to break down the square root of 20. So remember, think of a perfect square that goes into 20. So that's 4 and 5. The square root of 4 turns into 2. The 5 stays as a radical. So I am going to rewrite this as 8 plus or minus 2 square root of 5 over 2. Now what we have to do is you look at these outside numbers, 8, 2, and 2. And you have to ask yourself, is there a number that will go into all those numbers? Well, 2 goes into all those numbers. And so you have to reduce it. It's like you're having to reduce fractions. So 2 goes into all those numbers. So, and I'll write over this. So 2 goes into 8 4 times. 2 goes into 2 once. 2 goes into 2 once. So basically our fraction goes away. And we can rewrite this as 4 plus or minus. And I don't have to put that 1 in front of the square root of 5. And since there's a 1 on the bottom of the fraction, you know, our fraction is going away. So here is our final answer. Okay, E. On E, it is in standard form. So here's A, here's B, here's C. So X equals negative because that is in our formula. So you should always be writing down negative. And then B is negative plus or minus the square root B squared. Don't forget the parentheses. That's super important when you're typing it in. Minus 4 times A, which is 3, times C, which is 7. All over 2 times A, which is 3. So the double negatives are gonna make that 5 positive. Okay, so remember, I am just figuring out what this is, leaving the radical. So I'm only typing in that negative 5 squared minus 4 times 3 times 7. And I get negative 59. Okay. Now, 59 does not have any perfect squares. Okay. 59 does not have any perfect squares. So it's going to stay just like that. And all we can do is pull the negative. So 2 times 3 is going to be 6. And the negative is going to turn into an I. So we got 5 plus or minus I square root of 59 over 6. And that's going to be your final answer for that one. Okay. Then on F, we got to get it in standard form. Now, since this x squared is a negative, I'm going to take it and I'm just going to move it out to the front so it will become positive. So I've got x squared plus 3x minus 8. And that's going to equal 0. So here is our A, our B, and our C. Okay. So when we plug in, I've got x equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, which is negative 8, all over 2 times a, which is 1. All right, so if we start to simplify, we've got negative 3 plus or minus. Once again, we will calculate what's underneath here. So that's going to give us 3 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 8 is going to give us 41. And 2 times 1 is 2. So you want to try to figure out, are there any perfect squares that go into 41? And there's not. And there's no way to reduce the 3 and the 2. So on this one, this is your final answer.